Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our recording. We're going to start off with Learning Unit 5, and we're looking at which basically has to do with contemporary issues or contemporary questions around and themes around philosophy of education in general. There are 3 themes in this learning unit that we will be covering, and we will be looking at the first one tonight, which is transformative pedagogy. But before we get to that, I thought I would actually just put in a bit of the kind of banking education model and what that is all about. And really, this whole notion of banking education was first introduced by a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire. And he wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And according to him, the traditional education which we see in so many of our schools is still based on a model of banking, where teachers are merely depositing knowledge into the minds of passive students who are simply expected to memorize this information and on demand to regurgitate it in a test or an assessment. And this model of education is characterized mostly by a hierarchical relationship between the teacher and the student, where the teacher is seen as the expert. And as I said, the students are just these passive recipients of the knowledge. And in this banking model, the knowledge that these students are passively receiving is static. It's unchanging. And just transmitted from teacher to student. There's no emphasis or there's no focus on critical thinking. There's no focus on creativity. It's just the student passively absorbing this knowledge that the teacher imparts without questioning it, without challenging it. And those of you who are in my age bracket will will relate to this kind of education very well. And it was really those students, those learners who had photographic memories and who could memorize things like parrots that really did well. Those were the students who got the A's. Those are the students who went on to study at university with bursaries, etc., because they worked the system. They could play the system. And I know there's still a lot of that happening today in our classrooms and our lecture rooms. A lot of it is really just because of the way our curriculum has been formulated and designed. But I think there is a little bit more awareness of this not being the right way of transmitting knowledge or educating, I should rather say, and that there are some teachers who are really making lecturers making a huge effort to bring in critical thinking and to bring in application to life in the classrooms as opposed to just transmission of knowledge. So Freire then in his book argues that this education, and I mean we can all relate to that and we can all see it, that this type of education really just reinforces social inequalities and does it by reinforcing or perpetuating passive docile attitude amongst the students, and they basically they develop this sense of powerlessness and of dependency. There's definitely no empowering of these students to become critical thinkers or remotely active agents of change. And then further on in his book, he then advocates a different model of education. And this model is based on dialogue and collaboration, where students are active participants in the learning process. Knowledge is dynamic, it's evolving, and basically the relationship between the teacher or the lecturer and the student is one of co-creation, and that through dialogue and inquiry they're creating knowledge together. There's critical thinking, there's problem solving, there's creativity, and there's none of this just teacher transmitting to passive students. So with that in mind and with that kind of background, let's have a look at what then is transformative pedagogy. So transformative pedagogy is really just an approach to teaching and learning that seeks to, basically seeks to promote social justice and equity, and but by empowering the students to not be passive, but to become active agents of change. And so it kind of fits in with Paulo Freire's sort of idea of a better model, or beyond the traditional model of education. So it's focused more on dialogue and critical thinking. One of the key principles of transformative pedagogy is that education should be a process of liberation and not oppression. And this would then ultimately involve challenging the dominant power structures that exist in education, which will obviously include the hierarchy between teacher and students. So there's not this teacher's the expert, student is passive, and that the whole emphasis on standardized testing and rote learning um, is removed, or I don't know, dissolved, taken away. And as difficult as what that is with the CAPS curriculum, and even lecturing, even the way that some of the content has been put together in some of the modules, it's still very rote learning based. So yeah, it's so transformative pedagogy would be moving away from that, promoting critical consciousness, where the student has the ability to recognize social inequalities and to challenge them, and to actually have the skill, with the knowledge as background, but to have the skill to actually engage with inequalities and to make a difference. And then another key principle of transformative pedagogy is that education should be contextualized and relevant to students' lives. So this would involve incorporating student experiences, their perspectives, um, their knowledge systems. I mean, how often do we even engage in conversation about alternative knowledge systems? I think sometimes we become so blinkered onto the Western dominant knowledge system that do we even know that other knowledge systems exist? So rather than imposing this one size fits all approach, we begin to look at different perspectives and different knowledge systems. And so by contextualizing education, we have this whole transformative pedagogy then seeks to make education a lot more engaging and meaningful, where students want to have a deeper understanding of social and cultural contexts and issues. And that's when education takes place. So there's a lot of democracy involved in this learning environment. Students are encouraged to participate in this co-creation of knowledge, and creating opportunities for dialogue and collaboration rather than just receiving, and not questioning anything. So basically, overall transformative pedagogy then seeks to go beyond the traditional model of education, which Paulo describes in his book, and which can often be, um, which it wants to be not, doesn't want to be passive, that there must be no hierarchy, but more a promotion of an active, engaged approach to learning, which empowers the students to then, in their own right, become agents of social change. So that is really what transformative pedagogy is about. And between now and next week, Thursday, just as a discussion point, it would be good to hear from all of you. Well, those who are lecturing at the moment, how is your lecturing different from the banking model, and how have you incorporated things within your lecturing, within your lecture room, within your approach to your students that promote this transformative pedagogy kind of model? It'll be interesting to have that discussion with you, because often, we become so, as I said, so blinkered and so focused on getting the work done, getting through the curriculum. We forget to actually just stop and listen to ourselves and reflect on ourselves, and reflect on, isn't there a different way of engaging with students so that at the end of the day, they become confident or familiar with this knowledge, but not in a way that, you know, I'm the one that's imparting the knowledge to them. Says me, which is exactly what I'm doing at the moment. But it's very difficult to have a co-creation of knowledge when you're talking to yourself and looking at a computer screen. But that's how I would like to engage with you next week. So if you do listen to this recording before next Thursday, is to maybe just jot down some things that you are currently doing in your lecture room that fits in with transformative pedagogy. Okay, then the next thing to have a look at are within this theme are the epistemological foundations of higher education in South Africa. And it doesn't take rocket science to realize that um, our education system is complex, it's multifaceted, and it's because it reflects the country's history, the political context, the diverse cultural traditions. But I'd like to highlight some key principles of the epistemological foundations of our higher education. So very briefly, the first principle that I'd like to highlight is that um, knowledge is basically a social construct. And in the South African context, knowledge is seen as a social construct that is shaped by our historical, political, cultural forces. And this perspective recognizes that different knowledge systems exist and we should be able to coexist, and these systems should be able to coexist and then interact within the society, and that we need to move away from no single universal standard um, system of knowledge. So that would be one kind of one of the epistemological foundations that are quite current at the moment, that's out for discussion and debate. And again, I would like you to think about that in your lecturing. Are you aware of the fact that there are other knowledge systems? Allow do you allow that kind of space and that kind of dialogue to take place in your lecture room? Um, and is it, if not, is it something you would like to sort of like work into your lectures? Maybe give it a try and see how it actually can be quite enriching. And what I found quite fascinating is a lot of the times students don't realize that they have insight to other knowledge systems. Um, yeah, and it's only when you start talking and unpacking and discussing things do they realize that there are different ways of knowing things. The second big kind of like key principle here would be obviously decolonization. It's one of the major challenges facing South African higher education. We know that our legacy of colonialism and apartheid has left deep-seated structural inequalities and strong power imbalances. Um, but there is a growing movement towards decolonizing the curriculum and towards transforming the institutional culture to better reflect the experiences and the perspectives of various cultural groups that have not received any focus or attention. The third key principle would be social justice. So that is a key goal of South African higher education, is to promote social justice and to address our historical injustices that are still very much alive. And so we would have to look at addressing issues such as access of education, equitable education, diversity within our classrooms, and again, fostering critical thinking, looking at social responsibility, civic engagement. These are all the important things in education. It's no longer content transmission as we have discussed. A fourth principle would be interdisciplinarity. Basically, is this whole approach to bridging differences between different fields, different disciplines, promoting collaboration and dialogue. I think we are still too focused on like, I don't know, boxing disciplines, boxing subjects, boxing blocks of knowledge. And we should be looking at this whole collaboration and interdisciplinary kind of like lecturing. It takes hard work, because obviously you would have to, if you don't have knowledge in another module or subject, you would have to spend time with someone who does, and then work out a sort of interdisciplinary approach activities. I know in the School of Ed on the Cape Town campus, we are trying very slowly, one activity at a time, but we are trying to look at our ICE tasks, which really ICE stands for Integrated Curriculum something engagement. So, but yet they still really just are based on the content of the module that you're lecturing. And so we are trying to have a look at, as I say, one activity at a time, of where we can collaborate as lecturers and look at maybe 2 or 3 modules that have similar themes and integrate our ICE tasks, so that students do one ICE task that kind of counts for 2 or 3 modules. So, and that, as I say, a lot of these things, all of them really, takes concerted effort, and it takes time, and it takes creativity on the side of the educator or the lecturer. But if we're not going to do it, if we're not going to put in the effort, we can't expect our students to. And, then just the greater community out there will definitely not be affected. And then the last key principle is Africanization. And this is really just about the fact that there is this growing emphasis on Africanization, African philosophy, looking at African knowledge systems and traditions, experiences, perspectives, and trying to actually incorporate that into our curriculums. So, yeah, a basic job to promote more cultural diversity, inclusion within the content of our curriculum. So those are the key principles that at the moment are quite high on the kind of topical list of epistemological foundations of South African higher education, and I do think each and every one of them has a place in our lecture room, and it would be great to start experimenting with them. As I say, small steps, and that's how they then become a habit. Then the next thing we're going to look at tonight is the different philosophies that we have done and how they have, what their influence is on transformative pedagogy. Interesting thing is that of all the philosophies we've done, they kind of all promote or believe in transformative pedagogies. Following this banking model of education, it's really an industrial kind of during the industrial era kind of thing that came about, and it was kind of just stuck with us. But if we look at the classical philosophies, the classical philosophical views have had a profound influence on creating transformative practices and spaces in higher education. I mean, right from the ancient Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they all emphasized the importance of critical thinking and inquiry-based learning. So their emphasis on the importance of questioning assumptions, seeking knowledge through dialogue and inquiry, which is basically what transformative pedagogy is about. It was already existed then already, and was then already formulated to be important component of education. And if we look at the 20th century philosophies, we see several of them influential philosophical movements such as existentialism, critical theory that we've done, and they all have see transformative practices as being the focus, or something that educators and lecturers should be focusing on. For example, existentialism emphasized the importance of individual freedom and choice, and the need for individuals to create their own meaning and purpose in life. And so this philosophy has been very influential in promoting student-centered approaches to education, as opposed to the teacher being the transmitter of information. And again, they emphasize the importance of empowering the students to take ownership of their learning. And so that is exactly what transformative pedagogy is all about. If we look at critical theory, which kind of emerged around about the 1930s, their emphasis was on the importance of social justice and the need to challenge the oppressive power structures of the day in society. And so this philosophy has definitely been influential in promoting critical or transformative pedagogy. Um, Again, also emphasizing the importance of empowering students to become active agents of change and to challenge these obvious social inequalities. And then African philosophy, I mean, that has had a significant influence on creating transformative practices and spaces. African philosophy emphasizes the interconnectedness of everything, the importance of community, social responsibility. And so this philosophy too has been quite influential in promoting collaboration, interdisciplinary approaches to learning, looking at specifically at dialogue and also inquiry. So that's basically, I mean, the philosophies, most of the philosophies that we've actually done this semester, in one way or another, actually influence or promote a form of transformative pedagogy. So it's really a no-brainer that that is really the goal, I think, of being in education these days, and of maybe doing a module like philosophy of education, is to formulate and to think and to ponder on this whole idea of changing the way that we educate, one baby step at a time, and obviously very specific to the African or South African kind of setup. So then, as an educator or a lecturer, how can you be an agent of transformation? And there are various ways. Some of them you have a little bit less influence in, other areas you would have a lot more influence in. But if we have a look at the five main areas, the one would be in curriculum development, which is difficult as a lecturer who you get your content from a central academic team, or if you're a teacher, you get it from the education department. But you can still work towards transforming the curriculum by looking at and incorporating different perspectives in your class, engaging with your students, learning about their experiences, their different knowledge systems. So to actually just be consciously and mindfully aware of moving away from our Western centric focus, and to start including perspectives from marginalized groups. The second way is to just look at our teaching practice as a whole. So the way that you teach, the way that your teaching style, your teaching methods, the way that you promote critical thinking in your lecture room, creativity, um, the way that you allow your students to debate and engage and talk about social responsibility, social issues. So all of this you would be doing to move away from the traditional lecture-based teaching towards a more participatory and collaborative approach. Third thing, institutional transformation. A little bit less of an influence from our side, unless you are involved where policies are being drawn up. But again, you can play a role. You can do your bit for promoting diversity and equity, even if it doesn't mean that you have to challenge the structures of power and of privilege, even if you have to look at your own privilege. I know, and I've mentioned this before in my PhD, that was a very vulnerable kind of like process for me, because I had to unpack my privilege. I had to unpack my whiteness. I had to unpack my race, and actually see how this was all um, perpetuating, and just, you know, this whole, all these power struggles, and inequalities within education. So yeah, even though, you know, you might not be in charge of formulating policies and writing policies, you can definitely promote and advocate towards changing them. Community engagement is the fourth way. You know, you can get involved in community organizations, social movements to promote social justice. Again, this takes time, it takes effort. You can develop partnerships with community groups. You can do something with your students that involves, you know, something around social change. Be that model, be that person that your students look up to, and where you are the example of what change in education can be like in South Africa. And then the last one, which we all have control over, and I'm actually at the moment busy writing a book that Routledge in New York have asked me to write, which is about my personal transformation. It was the how can I say it, the theme or whatever that sparked my interest in pursuing a PhD. But um, every educator can undergo their own transformation. You are your own transformation agent. You can engage with your um, uh, self-reflection and critically examining your bias, your assumptions, and in doing that, you can unpack all these false beliefs that we have, all these incorrect assumptions. You can cultivate empathy and compassion, develop a deeper understanding of the different social and cultural contexts, and at the end of the day, ultimately, you will be modeling the kind of transformative learning that you hope to inspire your students to have. So it does kind of start with us. And although there are other avenues and there are other things, if we as lecturers and educators are not, we haven't transformed from within, we cannot practice a pedagogy of transformation or transformative pedagogy. It has to come from within. Otherwise, it's just a plaster. Otherwise, it's just talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And that is really what transformative pedagogy is all about. So that is this theme done. And I really look forward to engaging with you again next week, Thursday. And maybe we can come back to some of this, and you can tell me what your thoughts are and how you see it, and what changes you have made, or what changes you still want to make in your own space to promote this kind of education. Awesome. Have a great evening further and a great weekend, and I shall chat to you all live next week, Thursday. Cheers.